So much they let us play. We are known among ourselves infamously as the usual suspects. And I said my name is Kanute Rarey. I'm a storyteller, and I do sing with these guys, or at least I vocalize with these guys. And I live up the road. It was foggy this morning, wasn't it, boys?
Yes.
Foggy, it sure was. Yeah, we all live up the road. I live up near Shooting Creek in Clay County. So actually, I left town to play music today. But we're excited to be here. We're going to introduce ourselves and get started. So, Turner?
Yeah, I'm Turner Guidry. I'm a retired clergy with the Episcopal Church, and I'm here to pray for them this morning. I'm also a retired educator from the school system here.
I'm Alan Sermons. I live in the next valley right over here with this next ridge, about 5 miles from here. As you might can guess, I'm probably originally from South Georgia. You can excuse my accent there. But we're local folks, and we're very tickled to see you out here. I hope you're having a wonderful week today, this week.
Yeah, this will kick it off. We've got a little opportunity for you to get started. We've got music there for you, and anytime you want to jump in and sing with us, and we'll encourage that along the way, please do. And we're going to start out this morning with this line.
Yes, this little light of mine.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. I'm gonna take this light around the world, and I'm gonna let it shine. I'm gonna take this light around the world, and I'm gonna let it shine. I'm gonna take this light around the world. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Sing! This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. I won't let anyone blow it out, and I'm gonna let it shine. No, I won't let anyone blow it out, but I'm gonna let it shine. I won't let anyone blow it out. I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Join us. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Oh, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
Right, all right.
Folks, I should apologize. Try as hard as I can. I can't play this thing with a mask on, so y'all have to forgive me. I'm fully vaccinated, and I'm at least 20 yards away from you, so I think you're okay.
There you go. Well, Alan, I think, didn't you say you had a story for us this morning that you were dying to tell?
It's sort of a story. It's about diversity, and that's why we love coming to the folk school, because you folks come from all over the country, and you bring with you different ways of doing things. And we here in Appalachia have different ways of doing things too. This came to my mind recently when there was a death in a nearby community. A man named Fred, who lived there his whole life, as had his father and grandfather and great-grandfather way back before the Civil War. Known to everybody and esteemed and loved, and as you might imagine, he was kin to about half the county. The problem arose when his family needed to plan a memorial service. Because see, Fred belonged to one of these little churches that are everywhere in Appalachia. In fact, if you go out Brasstown Road right here, past the folk school, before you get to the first stop sign, you will pass about 3 of these little churches. They're all small, usually white, with a steeple, with an adjoining graveyard full of plastic flowers, and they look like they may hold about 30 to 40 people. And the problem happened when his family wanted to do a memorial service and realized this little church of Fred's would just not hold everybody. The parking lot wasn't big enough, the pews weren't big enough, so they decided to use a local funeral home. Now, the funeral home they selected was nice. It was a large brick building. First thing you notice about it is it didn't have any windows in it. And when you walked inside, you noticed this music playing on a continuous loop, usually old hymns. The air had a slight chemical smell to it that they couldn't quite disguise with air freshener. And the colors were muted and soft, and the thing that was good about it, it was big. It would hold any amount of people. They had all these folding accordion type separators that they could make it as large or small as they needed, and it would accommodate everybody. The reason they needed to accommodate a lot of people, when someone dies in Appalachia, it's a big deal. They believe the deceased gets a nice send-off, and they are doing their best to make sure that that happens. And they realized a little church would not accommodate them, but this would. Because there's another part of the culture that not everybody knows about, but that when there are services for the deceased, at the end of the service, people are invited to come up and speak about the deceased. There are no restrictions on this. They can talk as much as they want, as long as they want. And folks there really like this. And if this is not offered, they get very upset. As I said, I came from South Georgia, and we have this same custom. And when my father passed, we did a service, but I had been away from it a while and forgot that, and we did not do that. And believe me, I heard about it. So they're careful to allow for that. Now, this story has another man in it. His name's Bob, and he was new to this little community. In fact, he was new to Appalachia. And he knew the deceased, and he said, well, I want to go and pay my respects. I'll just speak to the family and just kind of tiptoe out the side, not really understanding what was about to go on. The service was scheduled for 10 o'clock in the morning, and Bob decided he would get there early. And when he got there, he was amazed at how many people were already there. And he figured I'd strategically sit in a good place and I think I could get out. But he noticed as he seated, more and more people began to come in. And about that time, the choir showed up. It resplendent in all their pretty robes. And they sang, when the roll is called up yonder, farther along, I'll fly away, shall we gather at the river, and quite a few other songs too. And as Bob noticed, as he was sitting there, this place was filling up. The time the choir finished, it was just about chock to block with people. And he was beginning to feel like I'm in sardine mode here. Now, Bob's anxiety was because he had booked a tea time for 1:30 over here at Mountain Harbor Golf Course in Hayesville. And he figured, well, I've got plenty of time. I can get a bite to eat and just drive on over to Hayesville, hit a bucket of balls before it's time to tee off with my foursome, and I'll be okay. But he noticed that it wasn't much room left in there, and their people were still trying to squeeze in. Well, after the choir finished, the minister started. He's supposed to do a eulogy. But up here, he knew that there were people in his audience. Anytime he spoke, they wanted to hear that somebody somewhere is going to hell and that they weren't. And that was important to them. They're very disappointed if they don't hear that. And then he began his eulogy, and in the process, he passed 2 or 3 good places to stop, but he soldiered on. Bob was beginning to get very anxious. He began looking at his watches, and he thought, I am just not going to be able to make this tea time. I'm not going to be able to get out of here, because once the minister finished with his eulogizing and brimstone, he said, will there be anyone out here who would like to speak about Fred, the deceased? About 2/3 of the hands went up. Bob's dismay mounted. He said, oh, no, what am I going to do? And all his fidgeting and looking around, He could not see a clear way out except down front. He said, if I go that way, they're going to put a microphone in my hand and I'm going to have to talk, and I barely know this guy. What am I going to do? And he said, besides, I've got to notify my foursome. I'm not going to make it. So he reached in his pocket and pulled out his cell phone very quietly and discreetly and realized he could not connect. Now, in all of his fidgeting, he checked out the back wall too, thinking there might be a door back there. He found a man standing back there. This man was about 6'5", very tall and skinny, and a little stooped over, a very pale complexion like he'd never quite seen a day of sunshine, and this sad, lugubrious expression on his face that Bob correctly deduced, that's probably the funeral director back there. So crowded as it was, he itched his feet out and slowly made his way to the back with a cell phone in his hand. And as he approached this man, in his best stage whisper, he said, "Can you give me the passcode for the funeral home?" The man turned his icy stare at him, looked down his Ichabod Crane nose, and said, "Have some respect for the dead." Bob looked at his phone and turned quietly. He said, "Now, is that all lowercase?"
Excellent.
All right, well, that's a good lead into our next song, Swing Low, Sweet Chariot. This chariot is taken from Elijah. When Elijah died, the prophet, the old Hebrew prophet died, the chariot came down from heaven and picked up Elijah and took him on up. And so this song, which was written in the 1860s, is about that. Is about that chariot dipping low to pick us up and take us on.
Yeah.
We'll start with the chorus there. And please join in. This song was written to be responsive.
Yeah.
Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Well, I looked over Jordan and what did I see? Coming for to carry me home. A band of angels coming after me, coming for to carry me home. Sing, swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Well, sometimes I'm up and sometimes I'm down, coming for to carry me home. But I know my soul is heavenly bound, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Now if you get there before I do, coming for to carry me home, tell all my friends I'm coming too, coming for to carry me home. Sing, swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home. Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home.
All right. Well, I was born and raised on a farm in Ohio. And when I was 6 years old and my brother Fred was 8, my brother Ike was 4, our mother died suddenly. We went to live with our grandparents and my aunt, who still lived at home. And they really wanted to make sure that they took good care of us. This was their daughter who had passed away. This was my Aunt Arlene's sister. And my Aunt Arlene she was concerned, of course, how to take care of us. She'd never been married before, and she had never had any children. And my grandmother, my grandfather, they hadn't had children since my mother and her brother John and my Aunt Arlene had grown up. So my Aunt Arlene came up with 5 rules to try to stay on top of us boys, because she didn't want us to get hurt. Now, rule number 1 was just don't do it. If you were thinking about something that might get you in trouble or get you hurt, my Aunt Arlene just said, just don't do it. Rule number 1. Rule number 2 was don't get hurt. Now, if you're thinking about doing something, we had all kinds of things on the farm we could get into, don't get hurt. Rule number 2. But rule number 3 was don't get killed. Yeah, my Aunt Arlene she felt a big responsibility here. And I know what you mean about that, don't you? You know
yes.
What I mean, yeah. And rule number 4 was don't hurt anybody else. She was a kind person, took us to church every Sunday, and grew up that way. But rule number 5 was, if you can't remember rule 1, 2, 3, and 4, remember rule number 1, which is just don't do it. Now, just don't do it. My brothers and I, we had a couple of rules of our own. Now, one was don't get caught. And the other one was don't tell Aunt Arlene. So because we knew we'd hear that, a lot of that. But there was all kinds of ways to get hurt on the farm and get in trouble on the farm, as you can imagine. And between slopping the pigs and milking the cows and baling hay and starting fires, bonfires to burn things down, and chainsaws to cut up the wood in the wintertime, there were all kinds of things that we could get into trouble with. But we had those rules all the way up until I left home, and I actually didn't leave home until I was a freshman in college. After my freshman year, I was actually a sophomore in college, and I still came home for summer jobs. When I did, my Aunt Arlene would apply those rules. Those are the rules of the house if we were in the house. And she loved us dearly, and she always was nice enough to bring up those rules. One day, I had come home from college, and I had a summer job welding, in a factory that I'd worked at for a couple of years to learn how to weld. But before I went to work, which was a 3 to 11 shift, I wanted to impress my girlfriend, go up and see her. And so I asked my brother Fred if I could borrow his car. Now, Fred is an incredibly generous guy. He still is today. He's just a loving individual, and I'm fortunate to, my brothers are both alive and both well, and we get to see each other often. But my brother Fred, I said, Fred, could I borrow your car to drive up to my girlfriend's house uptown, drive back and forth, and maybe get a chance to see her and wave at her, maybe get a little kiss on the cheek. And he said, well, of course you can. Of course you can. Well, now, I said my brother was generous. My brother had a brand new, silver, highly polished, fastback, 4 on the floor, Hertz shifter, big B8 Corvette Stingray. Yeah, great. And he said, sure, you can take my car to town. Well, I knew I needed to be really careful with it, and I got in the car and I drove to town. I drove back and forth up in front of my girlfriend's house, back and forth. Well, she wasn't in the sidewalk. She wasn't up on the porch. She didn't look out the window. I actually didn't get to see her that day. But I drove on to work, the 3 to 11 shift, and I parked the car way over in the parking lot, over in the side, so that nobody would ding it at all, and I went on to work. Well, I was at work, and it was about 10 o'clock at night. We get off about 11:30. One of the fellows said, hey, have you ever been frog gigging? Y'all know what frog gigging is? It's a dangerous thing for a little frog. It's yeah. Because we wait out there in the marsh, okay, and there was plenty of marsh up in northwestern Ohio, and you have a little pointy stick. You go out there until you find the frog. They'll sit quiet enough. You spot a light on it, kind of blind it and shock it. Stick it, and you take it home and you fry it and eat it. I know. So we did that. I said, sure, I would like to do that. I left the Corvette there, went out with my buddies. We were in the marsh till 2 o'clock in the morning, came back, had one frog. And I decided right then didn't want to really take the frog home. Somebody else could have it. I didn't plan on ever having a frog again, frog gigging, or eat a frog again, which I didn't. So I got my brother's car and I headed for home. And I was scooting home, and I was being careful. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. And there were 2 ways home. One way was to come right through and straight in and down the across through the stop sign, and that light of the car would shine right in my Aunt Arlene's window of her bedroom, and she'd wake up, and I knew that I would hear about the 4 rules, particularly rule number 1 when she got there. So the other way was it was a little bit of a curvy road, but you could come in the other way real quiet, cut the engine, slide in there. I know none of you have done this, right? Okay, cut the engine, slide right in there real quiet, park the car, and I might hear it, but I wouldn't hear about it tonight. So I decided to take the long way home. And I was driving home, and I was paying really good attention, really focused. And then I fell asleep. I fell asleep in my brother's Ford Corvette Stingray. Fell asleep, but I did wake up. I woke up just as the back tires were sliding into the ditch, and the front tires were catching on the asphalt. And you know how that is. He was a science teacher, among other things. And when the edge of that car caught the edge of that Corvette, the Corvette and I began to fly. And we flew, and we turned over and over and over and over into the field. Into the field, the car stopped on its wheels. I shoved on the door knowing I needed to get out, and the doors were all jammed because they were all catty-whoppered. And I looked up, and the windshield was all cracked, and pieces of it were still there. So I looked up, and I put my hand, I shoved that windshield out of the way, and I cut my hand just a little bit. I crawled up out of the window, over the motor where the hood used to be, over the fenders, the wheels where the fenders used to be, and over the front of the car where the bumper used to be. And it was a full moon, so I could see. I walked across the pasture field, and up across the fence, and up onto the road, and I walked home about a half a mile. Well, I walked in the house, and as I came in the house, I didn't think I needed to be quiet anymore. I just started flipping on lights, and I started slamming doors and heading upstairs. I headed upstairs with my brothers and I. We had our bedrooms were upstairs. I went in my brother's bedroom, and I said, Fred, I've wrecked your car. He said, oh, no, it can't be that bad. I said, yeah, I wrecked your car. The Corvette's sitting up in Farmer Ford's field. He said, oh, really? I said, yes, I totaled it. It's totally destroyed. And he goes, oh, he said, well, did you get hurt? I said, well, I cut my finger a little bit. He said, well, we'll take care of that in the morning. We'll go get it, get the tractor, pull it out. And matter of fact, my brother did do that in the morning. He got up there and got in that car and turned that Corvette on. And somebody stood on that fence, and he drove it out of that field. Good car. But I was ready for bed. My brother said, listen, you go on to bed, and we'll take care of this in the morning. So I started across to my room, and as I started across to my room, I suddenly realized my Aunt Arlene was going to be down there. She was going to be downstairs waiting on me. And she had to be awake at this point. So I went downstairs, and my Aunt Arlene was standing there. My Aunt Arlene looked at me, and she said, well, Kanute, she said, what happened? I told her, I said, well, you know, I was driving Fred's car, and I was out late, and I fell asleep, and I rolled the car in the field. And she goes, well, she said, did you get hurt? I said, well, yeah, I got my hand cut a little bit. She said, well, come on out here in the kitchen. So my Aunt Arlene took me out the kitchen, and she sat me down at the kitchen table. And she got some hot water and some soap. She got some methylate and bandages. And she sat there and she cleaned my wound, my hand, and she put methylate on it. She wrapped it up, and she said, now, Kanute, she said, you just go to bed now, and we'll talk about it in the morning. Well, the next morning, as I said, we got up, my brother Fred, and I went up, and we pulled that, and Fred drove that Corvette Stingray out of the field and up onto the road. And my Aunt Arlene never mentioned that wreck again. I learned 2 things that day. Once again, I learned how much my Aunt Arlene loves me, and that rule number 3, don't get killed, trumps all the other rules. Thank you. So we got one more we're going to end this with. So
You Are My Sunshine.
All right. Now, everybody needs to stay engaged here. So we got some music.
The state song of the state of Louisiana, after Jimmy Davis, the governor of Louisiana, who was also a country singer, claimed that he wrote it. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when
when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. The other night, dear, as I lay sleeping, I dreamed I held you in my arms. When I awoke, dear, I was mistaken, and I hung my head and I cried. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. I'll always love you and make you happy if you will only say the same. But if you leave me to love another, you'll regret it all someday. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away. You told me once, dear, you really love me, and no one else, dear, could come between. But now you left me and love another. You have shattered all my dreams. Let's sing. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. Please don't take my sunshine away.
All right. Well, thank you, Alan. Thank you, Turner.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you all for coming today and making some sunshine in our day, in this little overcast day. And we're excited. Go out today, create, inspire, share, enjoy the folk school. Come back again. Have a good day.
Yeah.